Welcome to Around the Blockchain. Don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, Tim and Vanessa, welcome to Around the Blockchain. Tim, I guess if we can just start with you, if you can just give us a bit of a brief introduction, and then obviously we'll move on to you, Vanessa, afterwards as well.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us both, Ryan. It's really appreciated. Yeah, my name's Tim Lee. I'm the CEO of Walking Between Worlds, and we've been working on the project since February last year. And my background is originally from within corporate finance. So I used to work for people like GE Capital, HSBC, Lloyds Bank, those sorts of guys, and got involved entrepreneurially with the internet way back on February the 12th, 1995 at 2:16 p.m. in the afternoon. I remember it that cathartically. And when I came across the internet for the first time, it blew my mind. And so much so that we set up an internet cafe bar and restaurant in Brighton in the UK, which is where I'm from. And we built a web design house from there, and we sold that in 2001. Then I came out to Australia and went back into corporate after taking 9 months off, which was beautiful. And then came across Bitcoin in 2011, did nothing with it. I thought it was way too geeky and I didn't invest. That was my mistake. But then, from a hobby point of view, if you like, I'm a great film buff and I love film. And I wrote and directed a feature film, which we crowdfunded, and we got pirated, not to the same level as Hollywood movies by any chance, by any way, stretch the imagination. And I started looking and saying, how do we, we've got to solve film piracy somehow. And we looked into the idea of blockchain, the technology that underpins Bitcoin. And I started going down the rabbit hole in early 2015, and I've never come back. So much so that I've written a book on the subject called Down the Rabbit Hole, and have been blessed to carry out a number of international keynote talks internationally around Asia, India, Dubai, New York, London, on the subject, the strategic application of blockchain. And when it came to looking at Walking Between Worlds, in 2017, I started looking at the fractionalization of art, because we're trying to look at how do we tokenize art. And going down that rabbit hole, I came across the problems of Indigenous art for the first time, where there were people, for example, from the States who were buying pieces on the streets in Arnhem Land and in the Northern Territory, for example, that would buy it for $250 and sell it for $25,000 in the US, and the artist would get nothing for it, in addition to the $250 that was paid. So looking at that, I was sort of saying, well, hang on a second, this just doesn't smell right. And we were looking at the fractionalization of art, and regulation was really nascent at that time, and there were some challenges relating to getting tokenization off the ground. And then when NFTs really started to begin to happen in November, December 2020, I started sort of saying, well, there's got to be something we can do. And then in February 2021, just said, right, we're going to do it. And blessed to have found some really great people, including Vanessa on the call here today, who's an amazing woman. I'd never say it in front of her, that she's an amazing woman, because it would go to her head, but I'm super blessed to have actually been introduced to Vanessa. And, we've been working on this project. Vanessa joined us in June, I think late June last year. And this was in tandem with the whole variety of reprobates from within and without, and from outside the cryptocurrency space. And we're just, just driven to achieve the mission of energizing Indigenous communities globally to capitalize on NFTs. So that's what brings us here.
Beautiful, great intro. Vanessa, would you also mind just introducing yourself to the viewers?
Sure. My name is Vanessa Lee. My people are from Yupungati and Miriam. I am Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional landowners of the people who are listening in today. I'm currently sitting on the land of the Cook and Yalanji people. Tim's on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Ryan, I'm not sure where you are. But for the listeners, welcome. And I pay respect to all elders past and present, and all of you listening in today. So I come from a background of medicine and health, and specifically what I was doing in that space is a social epidemiologist working with different policies and communities and making sure that the policies at the government level were being funded properly and implemented properly at the community level, and the community were able to articulate whether it was working or not. And so from that, I developed my own cultural brokering business, and I developed that business about 3 years ago, and for the sole purpose to enable that conversation between Indigenous culture and people in culture and non-Indigenous people and organisations, so that Indigenous people can move forward. And I do a lot of work in suicide prevention and the global suicide prevention strategy for youth and young people. People think suicide prevention is about going to an organisation. Suicide prevention is about, you know, looking at those social issues of poverty and you know, making sure people are in houses, making people sure people have food on the table and jobs, you know. And anyway, a mutual friend that was telling me about Tim's project about energising and empowering Indigenous communities, and I just said, I'm in. That's what I do. And yeah, and I was just so honoured to hear that someone wanted to bring Indigenous people into the digital world, NFT world, the same as non-Indigenous people, so we don't leave people behind. Because if we weren't doing this, we would be looking at probably a 5-year, 10-year gap. And so to me, I just sort of went, right, we need to connect Indigenous artists. I know culture. Tim knows all about the blockchain. He knows about finances. I thought, good. And then the team that we've got, they're all experts in their area. So it's just fascinating and at the same time exciting to be at this part of, you know, this pivotal point, making change and bringing it all together. And, you know, and I'm the chair of Walking Between Worlds, and, you know, ensuring that that strategic vision, making sure that culture is embedded in what we're doing, and that we're moving forward with Indigenous people, with the Indigenous artists. So that's me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's a great introduction as well. I'm in Perth, in a suburb called Treeby, so I'm not too sure if you're familiar with that, but just for your reference anyway, Vanessa. Before we unpack Walking Between Worlds, I want to just maybe go to you, Tim, and just get you, if you can spend a couple of minutes maybe just explaining NFTs to the viewers. I get this question all the time. I always find it interesting to chat to my guests and sort of see what explanation they come up with. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe just spending a couple of minutes explaining what NFTs are, and then we can unpack Walking Between Worlds, because I think that's going to be probably the majority of today's conversation.
Sure. Well, an NFT is essentially a digital fingerprint. If you think of it that way, you know, all of us have fingerprints, and that identifies who we are. Now, if you can attribute a digital fingerprint to a digital file that is a permanent record of ownership, you can then look at the ownership and the transference of ownership. And it defines that, for example, Ryan, you actually own a particular digital file. And if you decide to sell that to Vanessa, then the digital fingerprint moves across to Vanessa, and Vanessa now has that ownership of that file. So at a very simple level, just think of it as a digital fingerprint that provides the authenticity and confirmation of ownership. And why that's important is that you can really, for the first time, define and value a digital file based on ownership. So, for example, the crypto punks that, you know, they're selling for, you know, $5, $6, $7, $8 million, which is insane for a JPEG picture, but it's because you can define the ownership, and you can define the transfer of ownership, and you can define the provenance of ownership of, you know, where it's actually been and that type of thing. And so as a result, you can attribute value to that. LinkedIn, in CryptoPunk's case, for example, LinkedIn to the cultural significance of CryptoPunks as the first recognized project that was first registered to the blockchain as an NFT. That's essentially why they're valuable. But you can define that ownership. And so a digital fingerprint is the cleanest and easiest way of seeing what an NFT is.
Absolutely. That's a great explanation and a really good analogy as well. Vanessa, if we can kind of move back towards you, I wouldn't mind just getting just a bit of background on some of the, I guess, issues and, you know, roadblocks Indigenous artists in Australia sort of face. And then I guess if we can also maybe have a collaborative chat between yourself, Tim, and I about how NFT technology comes along and sort of obviously helps, you know, break down those sort of those barriers and those challenges that Indigenous artists have.
Well, you know, Indigenous artists have challenges all across the nation. You know, there's over in Northern Territory, we see a lot of artists being, you know, they get into a contract with a dealer and they get put in, you know, the working conditions, they're working in a tin shed and they're creating in a tin shed. And in that tin shed, you know, there's no air conditioning, there's minimum airflow, you know, they're sitting on the ground and then like they're getting 10% and there's nothing traceable. So their piece goes out and they've created this massive piece and it goes out to the gallery or to the buyer, whoever they're selling it to. And, you know, and then they get 10% of that and then they don't get any ongoing royalties. And that's one of the challenges, you know, and there's also other challenges with the artists where their items are stolen and, you know, and they're not paid properly and they're not able to trace where their pieces have been sold or the resale or anything. One of the artists we're working with, her name is Bibi, and you know, for Bibi, what happened to her was that she had this. She sold one of her paintings, Desert Flower, and she sold it to, you know, a buyer. And anyway, Bibi's a few years later, Bibi's on the internet, and she's looking up some things. And you know how on Google search now and again, Google says, people have also been looking at this. People have also been looking at that. And so they show her this resort in Poland. And the wallpaper in the resort is her painting. And so Bibi then takes, you know, Bibi tries to take them to court and is unsuccessful. So Bibi went and, like, this is an artist, an Aboriginal artist. So she went and did a law degree and took them to court to get copyright of her piece of work back. And she's one of the artists that we're working with. Now, had Bibi had that piece as an NFT, it would have been traceable. She wouldn't have had to go and, you know, go through all of that, all those issues. And she's not the only one. And her pieces are amazing. And, you know, she's not the only artist that experiences things like that. You know, there's other issues across where artists are you know, they're paying into galleries and the galleries are not telling them the full price or the ongoing sale. And we hear these stories all time and time again from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. And you also hear stories about how artists are creating with other artists and the other artists are taking their works. And so, and they're not, you know, you hear these stories all the time. And the other challenge is also isolation and remoteness. And, you know, people are on isolated areas or remote areas and they can't access equipment. You know, they can't access, say, an iPad. If something breaks, they can't access it. You know, if they can't access the internet. So, you know, and so it makes it much more challenging. And, you know, the other day I was reading in The Guardian about how an artist, her work was stolen off social media and someone turned it into an NFT. And so she was able to actually, like, she's doing something about it. And I thought to myself, now imagine an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artist who's in a regional, rural, remote area, who probably doesn't have access to The Guardian or other papers to have read that. So you've got these artists who just, in a place of faith, put up their pieces, trusting the world, you know, sharing their pieces, and all of a sudden they're not even aware that it's been turning into an NFT. And the biggest challenge is with, because we're talking about the oldest continuing living culture in the world, the oldest continuing living civilization, you know, and the newest technology. And so that you know, that great divide, those two very different worlds amongst it all. And I think that's, you know, that is a challenge in itself. And us, like what we're doing in this project, bringing that together is making sure that, you know what, nobody gets left behind. We're having those discussions, we're breaking down the pieces. But that is the biggest challenge with the artists. Like, you don't see the artists having that opportunity. And And then we start seeing in urban areas where the artists, we're starting to see that Indigenous artists aren't having that opportunity to communicate their pieces or share what's going on. I want to give you an example of an artist, but it's more of a solution. So, well, and I'll wait till we sort of have that discussion about solutions.
It's probably a really good really good segue into talking about Walking Between Worlds. I don't know, Tim, if you wanted to add anything to that point, and then we can move on to obviously chatting about the project you're both obviously working on.
Yeah, I think the one thing that is so powerful about this technology is the power of provenance to define ownership. And I wrote an article recently, which I entitled, "If you want to know about the power of NFTs, talk to Vincent van Gogh." And the reason why I quoted that, and it's my style of writing, I like sort of just getting people to think, well, how am I going to talk to Vincent van Gogh? He died in 1891. But when you look at the story of Vincent van Gogh, it's really important to understand how powerful NFTs are. So, for example, during his life, in today's money, he sold $2,000 US worth of paintings in his lifetime. But the paintings that have been sold since his death have actually, actually in today's money, about $800 million. Now, I know that because I went into all the archives and analyzed in today's money the price of each individual piece of art sold by, on behalf of Vincent van Gogh. And this was Dutch guilders, it was British pounds, it was Deutschmarks at the time, a whole variety of layers of currency. And there's a Swedish professor's history of money website that converts money in olden times into today's money. And so if there had been NFTs involved, the extended family of Vincent van Gogh would have generated, say, 5% of $800 million, which is $40 million, which is, nothing, it's not to be sneezed at. I mean, I know as a podcaster like yourself, that's just chicken feed. I appreciate that. But, for most of us mere mortals, it's a lot of money. And then when you look at the last piece that was sold on behalf of Vincent van Gogh, or of Vincent van Gogh's piece, and excuse my French accent, which is going to be atrocious, it's a piece called Les Meubles de Blé, the Fields of Wheat. And the provenance of that piece was very troubled. It was actually sold in 1913 to a Jewish German industrialist. Now, in 1938, that industrialist had to flee Nazi Germany, and the only thing he could sell was the painting to actually get enough money to get his family out. The painting then disappeared until 1940, when it showed up when the Germans, or the Nazis, actually invaded France and took over Paris. And the Nazis confiscated the same painting from an extended member of the Rothschild family in 1940 as she fled Paris. And then it went underground for a while and turned up at auction in 1978, where an oil baron, billionaire, bought it. And sadly, he passed away last year. And Christie's actually got the three families together and said, okay, you clearly all have title to this piece. And because it was stolen by or confiscated by bad actors, in inverted commas, we're actually going to divvy up the funds appropriately. And so basically, if NFTs had been in place, the bad actors wouldn't have been able to hide that they'd stolen it. And all this, the provenance of title would have been established very, very easily and quickly. And so it's all because of Vincent van Gogh, in terms of when you look at those scenarios, those stories that showcase if the technology had been in place, we're sort of retrofitting how much different things would have been. And so, it's the power of that analogy that is so powerful for Indigenous art. It's
a great example. I actually hadn't heard that story. And podcasters don't earn a very good living, so at least not me.
The stories is actually, I mean, that particular piece is in the Walking Between Worlds blog, so you can see it in the blog there.
Yeah,
But,
brilliant,
yeah,
brilliant example.
But yeah, it's really, I mean, it's one of those things that I always want to give examples that people can latch onto and identify with, you know?
Absolutely.
Just to explain, yeah, it's sometimes difficult concepts.
Let's move on to talking about Walking Between Worlds. I'm not sure who would like to go first, but either of you can obviously maybe just explain a little bit about what the project is, and I guess why you've sort of both decided to get it off the ground, and then we can move through obviously the different layers underpinning the project as well.
Well, I'll let the latest member of Blockchain Australia, who is Indigenous, and we think Vanessa might be the first Indigenous member of Blockchain Australia, expound in her dulcet tones what Walking Between Worlds is, because I think you know, yeah, because I think you'll find her version far more interesting than mine.
Thanks,
I've put you on the spot now, Vanessa, haven't I?
No, no, not at all. Well, I think it's, you know, Walking Between Worlds is about bringing two paradigms together. It's about bringing the oldest continuous living culture together with the newest sort of blockchain digital technology, and Walking Between Worlds is that bridge in the middle. And the reason it's been developed and the reason we're here, and we've said this during this conversation this afternoon, is that, you know, how disenfranchised global Indigenous communities have been. And, you know, when you think about how new ideas, new projects and social impacts like they present themselves, they make sure that Indigenous people lag behind, like Indigenous communities lag behind the rest of the world. Walking Between Worlds is aiming to fill that gap so we don't see that lag. And we're doing it by building a community-based program, like it's a full social impact program that empowers global Indigenous communities. And that empowerment is to empower them to basically grab that growth of NFTs and to capitalize on that growth and to, you know, and walk with us. And we're bringing that together. So myself as the cultural broker and Tim as the CEO, and I'm the chair, and, like, you know, the rest of our team. So, you know, we're bringing the culture into the digital space, into the blockchain space, into the NFT space, and so that people don't get overwhelmed. So, and we're teaching them how to walk forward. We've designed 4 pillars, and in those 4 pillars, like, I'm going to try and remember them. One is online digital education. One is collaborating, and in that collaborating, it's that enabling skill sets to be shared and to and enhanced. And with the education, it's about working with education partners to develop and grow in the NFT space. And I can't remember the 2 others, but I think I'm pretty much on mark. And I think I'm pretty much on mark, because it is about, you know, making sure that Indigenous voices are heard throughout NFTs, and that, you know, we don't leave Indigenous people behind. So we're walking between the 2 worlds. We're joining 2 cultures. We're joining multiple cultures, actually, and it's multi-layered. And I'm going to stop there. Go on, Tim.
And the other 2 layers of pillars of empowerment. There's we're building best-in-class structures in the metaverse. So what it means is we can actually showcase Indigenous art and Indigenous culture within the metaverse. So the idea is that as a collection holder, for example, going into a metaverse gallery that's dedicated to Indigenous communities, there might be, for example, an Indigenous meditation room, which, if you're a collector, You can go in free of charge. If you're not a collector, then you pay a fee to go in, that sort of thing. And then the fourth pillar of empowerment is to actually look at how investors can actually work with Indigenous artists to actually engage and empower. So collectively, it's an entire platform designed to energize and empower Indigenous communities in general terms. And Vanessa has summarized that really well, I have to say. And I will say one thing. Back in December, Vanessa, for the first time, went on to Indigenous radio, and the actual interviews on our YouTube channel. And
it was November.
Was it November? Was it? It was November. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, you see. And she was interviewed by a guy. Is it Trendy Trev? Is that his name?
Trevor, it's something. Yeah, I can't remember. But he was Indigenous. It was National Indigenous Radio.
The National Indigenous Radio was syndicated to the Indigenous community, and it's the first time that Vanessa had been let loose, in inverted commas, and I mean that in the nicest sense possible. And I would have to say, I listened and I was super proud that here was somebody who'd come into the blockchain space really for the first time in June, and 5 months later was talking about the project as if she'd been in the space for years. I was super proud, but again, I'd never say it to her face. You know, that's why she's wearing the mask, so she can't. So you can't see the blushing. But seriously, because a few people have asked us, what is this Walking Between Worlds? Where does the name come from? And it's it is really interesting, because Indigenous communities globally talk about walking between two worlds, between traditional and Western. And because we're looking at global Indigenous communities, and also because we're working with blockchain, blockchain-based tech, I know blockchain tech and I know the Western world, but I don't know the Indigenous world. And so we're walking between all these different worlds. So the Inuits in Canada, we've opened up dialogue with the Inuits in Canada, with communities within the Hopi Native Americans in Arizona, with the Mayan communities in Guatemala, and in all sorts of different layers. And so we know that once we actually build the playbook out of here in Australia, we can then replicate that with other Indigenous communities across the globe, via partners who are actually connected to those communities. So so Walking Between Worlds is about all these layers that you have to walk and to be effective in all the world.
Beautiful explanation by both of you. In terms of the actual project itself, obviously, Tim, I can see you've got it's 2,222 pieces that go on sale later on this month. Can you talk to me a little bit about the pieces? Either of you can jump in and answer this question, but can you talk to me a little bit about the pieces, and then maybe some of the artists as well, and I guess a couple of stories, behind their backgrounds. Are these pieces also going to be? Are these pieces also going to be underpinned by real physical art in the real world, or are they all just based digitally as NFTs?
There are two parts to the collection. We've got it's an algorithmic collection. So we've got 5 artists working on the 2,222 pieces. And so they're handcrafting the components, which we're then bringing together in terms of a standard algorithmic collection, but it's all based around Indigenous themes and tropes and that sort of thing. And then we've got 10 hero pieces, which will be at least 1, if not 2, from each of the artists that will be one-of-ones. And we were talking today about the possibility, and I don't want to promise it, of there being one collaboration piece between all 5 that will be made available. And so the idea is that the 2,222 pieces will be algorithmically generated, then there'll be 10 separate hero pieces. And the artists that we're working with, I mean, Vanessa, highlighted about Bibi Baba, who's, she's a wonderful woman and a great artist. And the story that she's had relating to the Polish resort, I mean, that just reinforces why blockchain is so important and that sort of thing. But
I was not saying her surname, Tim.
That's okay. I can bleep it out. That's no problem.
Yes, you're probably right on that. No, but I mean, the contract should be signed. It's going to be signed, I hope, tonight or tomorrow. And then there are the other artists, and because I'm going to make so many other mistakes and faux pas, I'm going to defer to my esteemed colleague, Vanessa, to shed some light on the other artists, because otherwise I'm going to completely make a fool of myself. Go on, you go. And stop laughing underneath your mask.
So I got the mask on. Sorry.
I can tell.
Anyway.
You see, it's like, I mean, I've got to know Vanessa's eye movements incredibly well, because it doesn't matter what culture you're from, when you get those daggered looks or those smiling looks, it works in every culture. So I'm picking up on the nuances.
It does. Picking up on the cultural nuances, exactly.
Exactly.
So we also have another artist. So Jimmy, he's up in Arab Island in the Torres Strait, and like Jimmy, last week, Jimmy, his pen broke, and he couldn't. His iPad pen broke so that he could draw, and Tim was pretty stressed. Ian was pretty stressed about it. And we're like, this is going to slow the artist down, being in the Torres Strait, having COVID around. It's going to take 3 to 4 weeks before he gets another pen. How are we going to fix this? And I said to them, well, actually, I'll just find somebody who's getting on a plane and going up to the Torres Strait, and I'll give him the pen and he can just give it to Jimmy. And
it is really interesting because, I mean, it's true there was an element of stress there. I mean, perhaps there's a little bit of storytelling there, but it was very true. I mean, I was sort of rationalizing and sort of thinking and saying, yeah, we'll get DHL. Where does that go? Would DHL go to Darwin, or where would they go? And how would we get across on the boat and this sort of thing? And literally, Vanessa was just sorting it out via the community. So the community solved the problem, and Western traditional ways of thinking we're still working out, how you solve it. I mean, as a white Englishman, who's been in business most of his life, you immediately sort of think, okay, how do we solve this problem? And a male as well is always interested in problem solving. And Vanessa just solved it just through the community. So it just shows the power of community.
Yeah, and he'll have it in his hands this afternoon, and that's it. And so, and Jimmy's ready to start drawing again, and it's just, when you think about the way we worked it out in community, and then you come over to the NFT community or the blockchain community, because it's all about community. Both sides is about community, and that's what we're connecting. We're connecting that community, and we're connecting the Indigenous artist cultural community, and with the blockchain community. And today we talked to the artists about having being on Twitter share spaces, and they were like listening, and they were very curious about it. And I think they're actually going to step out and step out of their creative comfort zone over here and come onto those Twitter spaces and have a conversation with us and with the global audience as well, and share their pieces. Because we also have like Toby, who's on board, and Toby's another artist, and his work is, he does this work, it's incredible. He uses a lot of 2D animation in his work, and so you not only get this piece that is digitally flat, you get this piece that actually moves in front of your eyes. So it's just, the creativity is incredible in the way Toby is presenting his pieces.
One of my next questions,
and there's a dishwasher behind me, so I don't know if you guys can hear that. That's why I sort of paused.
No, that's fine. One of my next questions was going to be how well receptive is some of this digital technology being by obviously the Indigenous community. You guys come from a very traditional background, and there's obviously some beautiful art pieces out there that I've personally witnessed in some galleries and that sort of thing. How has it been? Has it been a bit of a challenge to bring people into that digital world, or has it not been so difficult? How has that sort of process been?
So the challenge has been with the artist's traditional attitude to art, because a lot of the artists, they look at that whole traditional concept of there's a process. I do my art over here, I sell it, a gallery picks me up, blah blah blah. They follow that trajectory. And then along we come and we say, well, you can actually work with the gallery on a whole different platform. you know, and you can work with your art on a whole different platform. And the biggest challenge has been explaining the digital world. And Tim and I have been doing webinars, and Tim's like, you know, we've been doing discussions on, like, I've been doing radio talks. I've got another one coming up on January the 17th with National Indigenous Radio again, with a different radio interviewer, Lola Forrest. And then, like, we've also been doing, I've been putting stuff out on social media, on the Indigenous platforms, just talking randomly about what it is, what is an NFT. And we've also done, like, Tim's done a lot of stuff on Twitter Spaces and stuff, but it's been about us having the conversation as the two of us. I don't think it'd work with Tim talking or just me talking. I think the fact that two people that are experts in that area are coming together from two different cultures, from two different worlds, and breaking it down. And it's interesting that people are actually starting to respond, and people are messaging me. I've, like, in the last week, I've had 3 more artists come out of just nowhere and say, Vanessa, can I have a talk to you about this digital work that you're doing with NFTs? Because I want to move my work there. That's pretty big.
Huge.
You know? Yeah,
it's really
it is.
interesting. It's really interesting, Ryan. Back in the very beginning of December, Vanessa and I were on a thing called Chimp Tank on Twitter Spaces. And this is a profile picture project called Blue Chimp. And what they do is they do 3 days a week, they do a Shark Tank equivalent, where they have Chimp Tank, as they call it. And we were on there, and they normally have people on for about 15, 20 minutes. We were on for an hour. And the conversation was, there was so much interest in Indigenous culture, in terms of, you know, not only the beauty of it, but also some of the traumas relating to it as well, you know. And you know, the question about segregated schools came up, and all sorts of stuff, and it was really such an eye-opener. And I mean Vanessa, I mean, you know, you spoke to that. I mean,
yeah, and that's a good point, Tim, because it's not just about, the challenge hasn't just been about Indigenous communities understanding what digital technology is and NFTs and blockchain. It's also about, you know, the digital world understanding what Indigenous culture is, and breaking down those stereotypes. Because when they asked about segregated schooling in it, so Ryan, segregated schooling in Australia for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people was still in place till right up till 1986 in some areas. And so you had, you know, a school for non-Indigenous people and a school for Indigenous people. And then unfortunately, the school for Indigenous people did not take people up anywhere past grade 8. In some communities, they were lucky to go to grade 10, but that was it. And so, you know, and that was 1986, and now here we are in 2022. And, you know, you think about it, where are those people now? What is their education level? So we're talking about artists who may not have that knowledge to understand the digital world. And then, you know, and so Tim and I have been working together and breaking it right down, so that the artists, like, you know, we did a whole thing on what is an NFT and a whole conversation about it, you know, and people asked a lot of questions. And then we're going into just breaking it down into pieces so that artists and their families can understand, because it's a community. So it's not just about the artist understanding, it's about their whole community, the whole family understanding what we're doing and how we're moving forward, and how they're becoming involved in this. Because it's a when we say that it's energizing global communities, we mean that. Tim, you might like to explain some more.
what about energizing global communities?
The global communities, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said before, it's very much the discussions we're having with those that are conduits to the Inuits, to, you know, the Hopi, you know, Native American community, and that type of thing. And certainly by creating the playbook and looking at the Indigenous protocols, looking at the way in which you handle Indigenous cultural intellectual property, ICIP, which is quite a unique sort of structure where you have to protect Indigenous cultural intellectual property. Yep. That's going to be something that's going to replicate across, you know, different Indigenous communities. And so once we've gone through the hard yards and the challenges that we faced, we faced a variety of challenges getting this project off the ground. But, once we've been through that pain barrier, we can then learn from that and say, right, this is what we did, and this is what worked, this didn't work, and et cetera, et cetera. So that, because our plan is, once we've gone past the 3 collections, which will be, the next collection will be 3,500, the next collection after that will be 5,500. Then we're looking at a community token, which is cryptocurrency structure, obviously, to then ramp up, taking this into a more global structure. And so very much, with those 4 pillars of empowerment we were talking about, the collaboration, engineer, education, et cetera, that needs to be funded by professional investors, crypto funds and wholesale investors and that type of thing, just to make sure that we're in compliance with the regulation. And so, once we've been through getting the community engaged, it's then about getting the platform actually out there so that we can actually, really ramp up, the number of Indigenous communities that we can help empower, to capitalize on NFTs. Because one of the things is that the digital communities, there's such a massive digital divide that exists. And if you think of the technology in the West, is the best way I can describe it. When you think of the internet or blockchain, things generally tend to start at a very wide level. They then go to vertical markets, and then you go to niche markets, right? So if you think of, in the .com boom, for example, it was general internet connectivity. Then you go to real estate, to major sort of vertical markets, and then you go to niche markets. And in some ways, Indigenous art is, it's a niche within a niche of independent art, if you like. And so as a result, that the lead time for normally addressing, for technology to get into laggard communities would be years. And so what we're trying to do is very much bring Indigenous artists onto a level playing field with their counterparts.
Brilliant.
We're also,
sorry,
so
Vanessa,
I just
you go.
want to jump in, Ryan.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because we're also applying it to communities in the sense that we're asking artists at the first sale to donate a percentage to a charitable Indigenous organisation. And when we had this conversation with the artists, they were very excited about it. And they put so we've got a list of organisations, but they also put organisations forward. And they said, this is why we want these organisations, and this is how we want it done. And that's a big step, because we're not just promoting the individual, we're actually bringing the community with us. Because once the artist starts doing those sort of donations to the community will want to know, where did that come from? How did we get this? And suddenly we're educating the whole community about the digital, and that digital divide becomes less. And like Tim was just saying, that we close that gap on the lag time. And we're not just closing it on the artist, we're closing it for the community. So it just makes such a huge difference. And Walking Between Worlds in such a space is just bringing people with us, so nobody's getting left behind. You can see the change. It's phenomenal. You can see the change happening.
That's brilliant. So the Genesis, I guess, collection drops on the 22nd of, sorry, it's the 22nd of...
It's the 2nd of February.
2nd of February. Ah, yes, that's cool. Right. 2nd of the 2nd, 2022 at 2:22 p.m.
2:22 p.m. Now, we might, that 2:22 might possibly be 2:22 a.m. On PST, which means that it'll be 7:22 in the evening, Australian time. So it's somewhere around the world, it'll be 2:22 when we actually launch. We think, we're looking towards doing it in Australia, but with the pandemic sort of ramping up with Omicron, we may not be able to have an in-person event. So we may have to do a digital event, which means that we might do it at 2:22 a.m. US time, which then means it'll be about 7:30 in the morning in European time. So, because we have to get the balance right. If we can get a lot of the global market engaged, then we want to maximize that where we can. So it means that the Indigenous communities and the Indigenous artists will get will get their name out there, and that will get some money across to the charities.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, how has the project been received? Obviously through the different channels and networks and stuff you've been promoting through. Have you guys had a lot of interest generated, and are you expecting
Yes.
to sell out? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
We've had a lot of interest generated. Yeah, sorry, Tim.
We're getting a lot of interest, and I mean, in many ways, I mean, I've been in Twitter Spaces for the last 6 months, so laying the foundation. But the project itself is, once you've got that foundation in place, you can then talk about the project itself. And certainly, when we go into Twitter Spaces, the level of engagement is very high. And so, because of those connections that we've built over the last 6 months or so, we're creating an ambassador program. So we've got 8 ambassadors on board at the moment, verbally, and we're going to do that, for sort of 12 ambassadors, with the idea that when we can't be in spaces, they'll be in spaces, and they'll be in different parts of the world, and they'll still be supporting the project. And the idea is that we'll reward those ambassadors with a couple of pieces from the collection as part of our marketing, our marketing sort of budget for the pieces, if you like.
It's like creating a winner's enclosure.
Yeah, and we're actually launching a VIP mint pass. So for 25 people only, we're making available a 30% discount if they commit an Ethereum towards buying pieces in the collection. And what that does, that means they get a 30% discount. So what it means is that we've got, the objective is to try and sell as much as we can prior to the public sale, without actually not giving but still making sure that there's a public element so that people can buy, on the day. So we're looking towards, aiming to sell probably between 20 and 25% via the VIP passes. Then the idea of having a pre-mint whitelist, and people have already expressed interest in getting onto that. We've said, look, we're going to be announcing it soon, with the idea that then we have a minimum of 30% being made available on the day of launch. So, it's and it's because the number of pieces are limited, to 2,222, and it's not a 10,000 profile picture, project. It means that we've got a limited number for the Genesis collection. Mm. And because there are no other generative collections on Indigenous art, what it means is that these will be pretty unique. And so we hope and we believe that we'll get a lot of traction. I mean, I'm getting DMs coming through all the time, sort of saying, look, when's the whitelist? When's the whitelist? When's the whitelist? So, just in terms of, we've been talking about the project for a long time at a loose level, but we're now, because we've got all the artists together and we're getting all the artist bios are now coming through, and the pieces are beginning to be worked on, so that we can present high quality pieces to showcase what sort of art is coming out. I mean, we obviously hope it's going to sell out, but I don't want to categorically say, oh yes, invest in now because it's going to go guaranteed to go up. I mean, we're in this for the long term. This is about a community structure. So even if it takes a little bit longer to sell out, that's fine, because if we're building long-term relationships with people, that means we're going to have a long-term future. Because, I mean, as you know, Ryan, when we're in the NFT market, there are lots of flippers, and all they're after is sort of, when Moon, when Lambo. You see it in Discord channels all the time. I mean, you're laughing because it, unfortunately, it's true. Yeah. And that's the nature of the market. So you have to, in part, cater for that market, because you've got to have a secondary sales market. And so you have to have a balanced view of the best way to optimize the sales, whilst making sure we can maximize the revenues for Indigenous communities, Indigenous charities and the artists. So, so certainly we do hope that we're going to sell out quickly, but obviously there's no guarantees. We've just got to, we've got to just work on the basis that we're here for the long term. And if people engage with the project, which certainly we're finding, then hopefully we'll find those long-term supporters.
That's brilliant. I like hearing your view as well on kind of investing there. You sort of touched on, the project being being a long-term based project rather than something short that, flippers could get hold of, which I really like. There are a lot of projects out there, unfortunately, like you mentioned, in the NFT space that are literally just quick flips, and there's no intrinsic value behind them whatsoever. People just obviously try and, make as much money as they can as quickly as possible, move on to the next project. Those projects won't be around, I don't think, in a year's time, probably less. People are starting to create NFT projects like Walking Between Worlds with actual value
about the
behind
social
them.
impact, Ryan. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's about social impact, and like we've also reached out to people in the Pacific, digital artists in the Pacific. And I don't know if you saw recently, like, because there's this whole thing about Vanuatu putting an island forward.
I've seen.
And in the metaverse, yeah, and that was really interesting. And then
right.
I'll forward you that article, Tim.
No, please do so. Please do so.
I'm trying to get them on next, actually.
No, awesome. That'd be great if you can get those guys on. I mean, it's a very strange market in some ways, and I mean, because we're launching a community token, which we have to engineer the tokenomics. We have to design the tokenomics in such a way that the behavioral economics rewards appropriate behavior, right? And it's the idea that if you've got wholesale investors on board, you have to cater for wholesale investors and crypto funds needs. And their needs are, they want to invest, they want to get behind projects for the long term, but they also want to get their risk capital back, right? That's the reality. And so having been through that whole sort of corporate finance mill over the years, I've seen it happen more times than I care to remember. So we're designing things in such a way that with the community token, that has to be via professional investors, just to make sure we're not falling foul of the Howey test out of the SEC, which determines if you're a financial security or not. So the idea is that we're making available the community tokens. If people actually actively help Indigenous communities and help with engaging the platform and actually driving the mission forward, then we're going to be allocating the Walking Between Worlds tokens as a thank you, right? Now, of course, the value of any token is only worth what the community thinks it's worth. So if you've got a community that's expanding and growing and developing, then if they value that
the
token,
NFT community.
Yeah, well, it's the NFT community, but the crypto community in general, and those that are involved. Then when we go onto a cryptocurrency exchange to actually launch it, then what that means is, and there'll be vesting schedules in place for professional investors, but it means they can get their risk capital back and probably a bit of a return, for taking the risk, but then have some carry going forward. And then other parties that are actually actively involved and have been supporting the project, they can actually have a liquidity event where they can then convert the tokens into Ethereum or Bitcoin, whatever it might be, from the exchanges that they go to. So we have to think like an investor, we have to think like a cryptocurrency exchange, and we have to think like an NFT flipper to really make this work in the long term. So there's a lot of thought that's gone into this, and we have to make sure that that the thought is right,
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I do apologize. I do have to go, but can we maybe get some closing thoughts from obviously both yourself, Tim, and Vanessa as well, if you can obviously chuck in some closing thoughts for the viewers.
Go on, Vanessa.
Oh, well, I just think that, as a team, we are, how do I say it? We are expanding thought processes amongst Indigenous communities about digital platforms. We are creating something that is new and tangible and not leaving people behind. We are in the digital world, in the cryptocurrency world, in the NFT world, in the blockchain world, we are creating a new culture, basically, because we're bringing the oldest continuing culture into the newest digital culture. And that cryptocurrency has it, even though it has its own community, by bringing in Indigenous culture into the cryptocurrency community and joining the two, we're not leaving anyone behind. And it's a new form, like it's a new form of social impact, in the sense that, we're not reliant on governments. It's decentralized, and it's reliant more on the people. And the people are moving it forward as a community. And I think that's really important in this space, because the community hold that essence of culture, both in the cryptocurrency culture and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, or Indigenous cultures, communities around the world, I think, and that joining together and walking between worlds. And that's what we're doing. We're bringing those two cultures together.
Yeah, and I guess my last summary thoughts would be, we're actually creating a new model for social impact funding, right? And we're trying to create an asset class called ComFi, which is community finance. So if we can, so we've been thinking very carefully about the regulation, about the structures, around how you reward behavioral economics. And I guess, the model that was in my mind when I was thinking about the sort of ComFi structure, how to structure this, was very much where you see birds flying south for the winter. Now, in Australia, you don't see birds that often, but you're doing this. But in the UK, every autumn and winter, the birds would fly south and the geese would fly in a V formation. So if you think of that V formation, when birds fly in a V formation, they actually, as a flock, they fly 71% further than they do if they flew individually. And so if you take that model from nature and you have a mission statement, ours is energizing Indigenous communities to capitalize on NFTs, then if everybody is working towards that same direction and they're rewarded via community token to drive in that direction, if we get the same 71% improvement in the community that's actually in that V formation, how many people are we going to take out of poverty? And that, that's the point that I wake up and say, that's why we're doing this. Can
I just add something, Ryan?
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate what Tim just said there. I just want to clarify that when I said, it takes it away from government, it's because it goes back to my point about segregation, about inequitable policies. Because we're embracing Indigenous artists and communities and their voices. And, and I fully support what Tim is saying. You wake up every morning and you think this is an opportunity to take people out of poverty. It's an opportunity to prevent a suicide. It's not rocket science. Most people in poverty take their lives. So, you close that poverty gap, and all of a sudden we might see that reduction in suicide. So
yeah, and it's a tragic problem across the globe with Indigenous communities. So if we can empower from the bottom up and actually give the tools to actually put all of the communities on a level playing field, that's, from a humanitarian point of view alone, just think of it from that perspective. Sure, we have to be sustainable as a business, and we have to make money to survive. So, but it's about, if you can do well by doing good, there's nothing better. And I think if there's anybody in the crypto space that really does want to do some good with the excessive returns that most of us have had, if we're brutally honest, come and talk to us. We'd love to take some of your money, put it that way. No, we'd love you to get involved in the project somehow, and support the project for the long term. It's not, there might be, like anything, there'll be ups and downs in terms of the pricing and the way, NFTs will go, but come along for the long haul and make a difference.
Exactly.
Very well put, guys. Look, Tim and Vanessa, thank you guys both for your time. We're just going to say goodbye to the viewers now, but thank you both for your time. Stay on the call for me. And I appreciate obviously you both jumping on.
Thanks for the invite, Ryan, and wish you all the best with the continued success with the podcast.
Thank you.
You can add up those multi-millions that we've been talking about.
That's right. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, viewers.
Thank you very much.
Ryan. Thanks everybody.